Hi, I am Dr. Bastaras. I teach international business at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I am also the founder of the Culture Project, and I need your help with, at this particular time, some research projects, but also if everything goes well, hopefully on a long-term basis with managing the Culture Project. And so as a job sample, I would like to give you a task that is very illustrative, very typical of what you would be doing on the research side of the project. And I just want to see how you complete this task. In full disclosure, I will be paying attention to first your sort of showing up. So my experience shows that many people sign up for different opportunities and then never show up. So initially they think, oh, it would be a good idea to perhaps be part of that team or maybe get that job or work on this project. But when the time comes to do the job, they just simply never show up. So obviously for me, I want to make sure that you show up and try to do it. And then obviously the quality of the work. So the task itself is not difficult, but I want to see that first you can autonomously complete it with the instructions provided through this video. You can take it and actually complete the task. So I don't have to hold your hand all the, every step of the way, so that you can comprehend the instructions and you can follow them. Second, I want to see how well you can present your work. So basically, how well you record what you've done, how well you present the results of your work, how well you report, perhaps at the end of the day, what's been completed. Again, I've had some difficulties in the past with the students who were a little sloppy in that regard. And I'll also pay attention to the way you communicate with me and essentially how well we fit together. If you do well, you'll get the job. At this time, for this particular summer, I need several students. So as long as you do everything well here, you have a very, very good chance of being accepted for the position for the summer. And then, as I said, my goal is to select one, possibly two people to work with on a long-term basis. In fact, this can become your career. So the project needs people, and we do have a few people on the payroll. And there is a good chance by the time you graduate, we may even have a permanent position for you on our team. So the job sample that you will be working on this time deals with a project that I'm trying to conduct that would inquire whether or not using student samples in international business research is an acceptable option, is a good option, if the findings from those student samples generalize to the general population. Just to explain what that is so you kind of know the context of the study. When we are studying human behavior in cross-cultural situations, in cross-cultural teams, in multinational organizations, to study that phenomenon or those phenomena, normally we have a couple of options. One, you can assemble a sample or draw a sample of people who have had that international experience, and you can ask them how things developed for them when they did it. Like, for example, if you would like to understand how international teams select leaders, or if presence of a leader on the team helps the team perform better, you can reach out to a group of people who have had an experience of being members of global virtual teams. And you can ask them if they had a leader, how the team leader was selected, and how the team performed. And then by looking at their answers, you can make some inferences about presence of the team leader and its effect on team performance. Alternatively, you can again collect a sample or invite a sample of people, a group of people who may have not had that experience, but then you would run them through a series of experiments. You would put them in teams and maybe ask some teams to elect leaders, and maybe some teams will have no leaders, and you can compare if those that have a leader perform better or not. Or you cannot give them any instructions with respect to the leadership and just see how and if they will elect a leader. Or you can just simply conduct other forms of survey or questionnaires, or just talk to them and see what they think, what they believe. And so by looking at this sample, you can then make some predictions about how these things work in the real life. Now, most of the research is conducted by professors, university professors like myself. And in most of the cases, or Usually it is easier for us to find a sample of students than a sample of corporate employees, especially if you want to do some sort of an experiment. It would be very hard to convince corporate employees to participate in those experiments or to get a permission to experiment on them for your study. And so many professors use students for their research. They would conduct a survey of the students. They would maybe do some experiments in class, sometimes with maybe some bonus points that they get in addition to their course grade. The concern here is that maybe research conducted using students yields different results than research conducted using non-student samples. Maybe students are younger and think differently. Maybe students have no work experience and behave differently, let's say in teams or in different situations. Maybe students are not compensated as employees and because of that try less. So there are all kinds of reasons to believe that student samples may produce different results than non-student samples. And so the question then becomes, is it even feasible? Is it justifiable to use student samples for research on international business? Maybe those results do not generalize to the general population. And if so, maybe we should not even pay attention to the studies that were conducted based on the student samples. Or maybe it's the same. I mean, if you ask people how they select a leader in the team, maybe they go through the same process. Why not? If you ask them what kind of challenges they experience in international teams, there is no reason to believe that the differences of culture, maybe time zone differences, maybe some sort of conflicts that happen in student teams, maybe they are very similar to those that happen in real global virtual teams in the corporations. So to understand this topic, what we are trying to do here is to find a bunch of studies that asked the same questions, but some of them used students as their research subjects, and others used non-students, employees of organizations. And so as stage one, I selected about a dozen journals that publish international business research. And we already have a lot of what they call meta-analyses. So we already have a lot of sort of reviews of results of work that used non-student samples. Now we are trying to get the same results for the student samples and then compare the two bodies of literature or research. And so as the first step, I went through those dozen or so journals and extracted all of the papers that had the word student in them. It doesn't mean that all of them used students as research subjects, but that was kind of the first stage search. Then I went, with help of some other students, went through those papers and looked at whether or not they actually measure something in a student sample, whether or not they actually did an experiment with the students. So we're trying to understand that now. And so we've selected those studies. And so let me show you on the screen here what those results look like, and then explain what the next step would be, and that's where your help is needed. So here is a folder that you will be working with, and I will give access to this folder to you through Dropbox. And as you see, we have 9 journals here: Journal of International Business Studies, Journal of World Business, Journal of International Management, Management International Review, International Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology, and so on and so on. And so for each of these journals, these are the papers that mentioned the word student in them. So for example, for the Journal of International Business Studies, as you can see, we have found 1,085 papers that mentioned the word student in them. Then we went through those papers and checked which ones of them actually did use student samples and which ones didn't. And so we already have an Excel table for each of those journals that looks like this. And so here, as you see, you have the file name, just like in this folder that we were looking at. So we have the same list of papers. As you can see, exactly the same order, exactly the same sequence. Let me sort it one more time. Sort, just to make sure that I sort it by the right, yeah. So 2145, it seems like a couple missing here at the beginning, but everything else is in the folder. And then when we looked at those papers, it seems like most of them didn't contain student data, at least for this particular journal. but there were a total of 35 papers that did contain student data. Like, for example, this particular one here, this one here, and so on and so on. And so what we now need to do is to go to each of those papers that have been identified to contain student data and record some basic characteristics about that study, specifically what exactly was the nature of the study, what were the variables they were trying to study in that sample. And so this is what you need to do. You will be assigned in an email, I will send you the list of papers that you need to work with. You will be assigned a list of papers that you need to code, and I will ask you to go through about 10 of them. And you will go one by one and do the following operations. Let's say I did assign to you the Journal of International Business Studies, and let's say I told you to code the first few papers. Let's do them together. So looking at this column here, we see that the first paper, and let's say you've been assigned that paper, is this one. So it will take you a long time to find this paper in the folder. So what you want to do is probably first you want to probably download that folder from Dropbox altogether, so you have it on your hard drive. Because if you do it directly from Dropbox, it will take too much time. In fact, ideally, you probably want to have a Dropbox installed on your computer. It's free. It will take only a few minutes, and you can easily Google how to install Dropbox on your computer. Very useful program. Great, you probably know how to use it, but if not, watch a short video, just Google it online, and you'll find the instructions. So once you download it, you will have it as a folder like this on your hard drive. And then you just go one by one and find those papers and code them, as I will show you in a minute how. So it may be best to just simply search in that folder for the paper with the right name. And if you give it the whole name like this, it will have a hard time finding it because it's too much time, too much text, too many special indices. So it may be easier just simply to copy the page numbers, and chances are it's a unique list of page numbers like this. And as you see, one study comes up right away, and sure enough, it's the one that we need here, 2008, 39.7 page numbers here. So that's the one that you need. So you put your name here by coder, and you say that you coded this paper. So you would put, in my case, Vas, right? So you put it here. Then you open the paper, and we will code it together. So there is a template in the same Dropbox folder that I just showed you. And let me show you what the template looks like so you can use it for your for recording your results. So here's a template that is called paper coding form. So you open it, and as you see at this time, it's empty, right? And so we'll code the papers, the information or step by step. So we will go with coder, your name. So I enter my name here. Journal, that's JIPS. Let me just open them side by side so that you can see what we are going here with, right? So JIPS. So that's the journal. Paper ID, well, let's take a look here. So again, if you have a computer with multiple screens, it's much more convenient to work with it instead of switching between the screens all the time, between the windows all the time. But you can just put them side by side like this and work with it. So anyway, the first paper that we are looking at is this one, right? So we put it as paper ID. So we don't need the words PDF, but we'll put the rest. And so paper ID goes here, so we know what paper you coded. You opened the paper, and we want the title of the paper, right? So let's do it like this, and let me close here. Can I close the panel so that okay, it wouldn't allow me to close the panel, but we'll do it like this. So that's the title of the paper, all right? If you put it right here, sometimes it messes up the font, so it may be easier just to put it here. And Perceived, it seems like I didn't copy the whole thing, so let's try it again, like this. And right here. Okay, so we got the global perspective. Next field, we want to get the year when the study was published, so we can look at when the data came from. And it seems like it was published in 2008. I highly recommend highlighting everything that you code. This way it will save time if we need to check later on what was coded. So we put 2008 here. Next, student sample. So is it really a student sample or not? We will put yes or no if it's a student sample. There is a good chance that someone who was selecting those papers, me or somebody else, made a mistake. Maybe the paper didn't use a student sample. So let's take a look. So we go through the paper. It's a good idea to read the title so that you know what the paper is about. In this case, it talks about a relationship between television viewing, values, and perceived well-being. So basically, how much people view television and how happy that makes them feel. Not really related to business, but I suppose some connection is possible here. All right, so let's see if they use the student sample. We'll skip the literature review, we'll skip all the theory. We go directly to the method, right? And so in the method, they should describe the sample. So I'm going all the way to the method, and so here they have the sample, right? Let me just highlight that so I can. So sample, and I'm not sure why it's highlighting it in such a strange way, but that's okay. And so let's read. Respondents for this research were college business students. Wonderful. So that's what we need. So we put yes here. The next question, we want to record the variables, the constructs, the phenomena that were studied in this paper, so the measures. So let's see what they measured here. So we see right away that nationality was one of them, right? So we have this. So we'll put nationality. So nationality was one of them. What else did they measure here? We have demographics. I mean, that's kind of understandable, but let's put it here. So in most cases, there would be demographics. All right, so what else? So they have actually measures here, and let's see what those measures were. So they had materialism, whatever that is. Okay, let's put that. Materialism. What else did they measure here? Religiosity. So they probably wanted to see if more religious people watch more TV, I guess, or something like that. Perceived socioeconomic status. So we'll put here socioeconomic status, SES. What else did they have? Relative evaluation of life satisfaction. So basically life satisfaction. And it seems like that's all they did, but we will verify this by looking at the correlation tables and see what variables they listed there, and maybe add the hypotheses in a second. So let's go to the results and let's see if they have a table with the results. So we have, yeah, indeed, that's the results, right? And they have nationality here, and they looked quantity of viewing TV. Oh, that's actually the most important, right? Viewing TV. So that's the most important variable. Probably should have listed it as the first one. And so they looked at viewing TV, religiosity, materialism, perceived realism, whatever that is. Oh, that's another one. Perceived realism, perceived socioeconomic status, and we talked about that, SES, and life satisfaction. And so they basically looked, as we can see, how those things vary from country to country and how they correlate with one another. So they have this big correlation table. And so the main idea of the paper, let's look at the hypothesis one more time. So let's see what they hypothesized here. And that's something, again, we want to record. So they said that materialism negatively influences one's perception of socioeconomic status. Materialism negatively influences one's relative evaluation of life satisfaction. Evaluation of perceived socioeconomic status, again, is influenced by life satisfaction. So basically, they're trying to see how all those things relate to one another. Let's see if they have any more hypotheses. Quantity of television viewing positively influences perceived realism. Okay, oops, that's too much. Then quantity of television viewing positively influences materialism. Quantity of television viewing negatively influences relative life satisfaction. Perceived realism positively influences materialism. So they basically say everything correlates with everything. And so we have recorded all those variables, and then maybe results or summary of the results. We can say here all these variables are interrelated. Right? So we don't want to go into too much detail, just say a couple of words here. In fact, less is better than more. So if there is a specific question they're trying to answer, get that question. But in this case, it literally seems like they measured like 5 different things. And the hypothesis is that all of those are related with one another. In fact, somewhere here, we just saw a model that seems to show how they predict. Yeah. So the more people view TV, the more satisfied they are, or I guess negative, dissatisfied they are with TV, with their life, and the more religious they are, the more they are satisfied with life. So plus, we don't need to have all those hypotheses. We just know that they're looking at those relationships here, right? So that's basically it. So this one was a very good study. Everything that we needed was here. It was used based on the student sample. So we save it here, right? Okay, wonderful. So we don't need to, well, we will save so that we have the highlighted stuff, right? And for yourself, once you've saved it, you might want to also, for the paper, you might want to maybe move it to a different folder. So for example, we will call it here folder processed or coded. So for yourself, once you're done, you might want to move that study there so that you know that you have already processed it. So we can put it here, right? So this is the study. We can control exit and then put it in the coded paper. So this one's done. Let's do another one. And let's see if it's going to be any different. So looking at the paper that we had with the journalist, the next one is basically the next study. Again, I want to find it like this. And in the folder, just like before, I will paste it, and that's the paper that we need, right? So I will copy the full name. I will put here the paper ID. I will again put my name and Jibs, so coder and journal. And I will now open that study, and we will take a look at whether or not it contains the data that we need. So we see that it's a 2008 publication, but does it contain a student sample? I'm looking at the paper and it's only 3 pages, and it only contains a letter from the editor. Indeed, it does mention students somewhere in it probably, but it has absolutely no data. So whoever selected that study for the use of student sample was wrong. It does not contain a student sample. So the coder, the one who selected the study, made a sloppy mistake. So no, it's a useless study. We don't need it. So there is definitely a problem there. So in fact here, when we recode the study, so I'll put that was coded it, but I would even change that to 0 so that I know that it's being looked at, it's been coded, but it does not contain student data. So somebody made a mistake, pay attention because it's easy to make a mistake. Let's do another one. So this one here. So again, I will copy only the page numbers, and I will go back to the full list, and I will type the page numbers. Again, one paper is, comes up. So let me record the paper ID here. The title of the paper, and I think I forgot to include the title from the previous paper, so I would go back and get the title, but for now, where is the Introduction to Symposium is the title, right? Introduction to Symposium, that's the title. It was published in 1998, sorry. Does it contain student samples? Again, I get suspicious. It's only 4 pages. It looks like some sort of a letter from editor, and I don't see any data here. So whoever was coding that study, again, made a mistake. There is no coded data, codable data in this paper. So coded by Vas, it's a Jibs paper, and it doesn't contain data. Mistake. So in fact, that's such an obvious mistake. I have no idea how people could have made a mistake like that. So I'll change that to a 0 for my own records. Let's do one more, and hopefully this one will contain the data. What worries me is that whoever was making those initial choices almost seems like somehow randomly maybe gave us the selections. So at some point we may have to go back to the studies that were originally identified as containing no student data and check them, because maybe there was an error not only of commission, so saying that the study contains the data that we need when it actually doesn't, but maybe there were also errors of omission, saying that there is no data that we need in the paper, whereas in reality there is some. So, but anyway, let's go to the next one, and I think this is the next one on the list. Again, you will have a list of papers that will be assigned to you. Let's take a look at this particular one, and let's see if we can find something that is useful there. So I'll go back to the list of papers, put my pages. This is the paper that we need, right? Again, I will copy the paper ID, and we'll put it here. Oops, sorry, that's the one that we need. And the title of the paper is Negotiating in the United States and Hong Kong. I'll copy it here. The year is 1998. The most important question is, does it contain student data? Let's go directly to the sample description and see who the study participants were. Participants were business students, hooray. So we have a class of business students from Hong Kong and another class from the United States. Perfect. So it contains the data that we need. Again, I forgot to put my ID and GIPS here, right? Oops. Well, let's see what they studied here. So we seems to me have the nationality here right away, Hong Kong versus the United States. In 98, Hong Kong was an independent country. Now officially it's part of the People's Republic of China. And measures. So let's see what they measured. Cultural values. Wonderful. We'll put it as variable 2. Cultural values. What else did they measure here? Negotiation norms, whatever that is. Negotiations norms. So probably negotiation style, right? What else do they have here? Outcomes of the negotiations. So they had some sort of an experiment where people had to negotiate and try to get as much out of that negotiation as possible. So we'll call it outcome of negotiations. Let's see if there was anything else that they measured. It seems like it's all, but we will take, again, to confirm, we will take a look at the correlation and result tables, and then maybe back to the hypothesis to make sure that, what they hypothesized is captured in our paper. So Control Shift plus turns the table 90 degrees to the left. And so we have here cultural group differences on standardized negotiations norms. So I can see that they looked at negotiation norms, competitive, compromise, self-interest, altruistic, and they have national averages. So apparently some are, like Americans, are less competitive and more problem-solving oriented, apparently, right? And Hong Kong, whatever that is, more competitive. And yeah, I guess that's what it means. And then they also looked at negotiation reports of own goals, and then differences in experimental conditions. I guess that's how many units of something they got as a result of negotiations. And so those who were self-oriented got more, and those who were cooperative got less. So apparently that matters, right? And so let's take a look. So it looks like they were looking at how negotiation norms and nationality relate to the outcome of the negotiations. But let's take a quick look at the hypothesis and see what they actually hypothesized to find and probably found. So they have a bunch of hypotheses here. Let's take a look here. Hypothesis 1 says US negotiators will view self-oriented behaviors as more appropriate. So Americans will be more self-oriented than Chinese, essentially. Americans will view joint problem solving as more appropriate than US, Hong Kong, Chinese negotiators. So Americans will be more self-interested and more inclined to problem solving. Hong Kong negotiators will view equality-oriented behaviors as more appropriate, so more collectivist outcome, okay? And then pro-social instructions will lead the goal to, okay, so and then basically how those norms lead to different outcomes. And in fact, it seems like they hypothesize that the results will be different for different cultures. So the more goal-oriented or self-oriented Americans are, the better they perform. But it seems like they say that the relationship between the outcomes and negotiator satisfaction will be moderated by culture. So people from different cultures will have sort of different outcomes, different views on the outcomes of the negotiations depending on the style used. Again, you don't need to get into very much detail here, but you can tell from these hypotheses and the results that the goal was to see how people from different countries have a different negotiation style, essentially, or negotiation priority or method or norms, how those relate to the results of the negotiations, and how nationality sort of moderates that effect, so moderates that relationship. You also might want to read the abstract. Again, it sometimes gives you a nice summary, but again, that's if you want to learn more and get it in more detail. So in this case, we got the nationality, cultural values, negotiation norms, negotiation outcomes, and apparently they also looked at satisfaction with negotiation outcome. And then again, you can put in the summary of the results. All of these variables are related. Again, we don't need to get into much detail what predicts specifically what. It seems like we are looking here at how nationality, negotiation style, and outcome of the negotiations relate to satisfaction with those negotiations. But that's what we got here. And so we will do it for every paper. For some journals, like Journal of International Business Studies, as you see, we have only 34 papers that we can potentially work with. So let's save this paper here. And because we processed it, we will move it into Control X to cut it, go up or back to the total. And for coded, we put it here, coded. So we know it's been processed. So for the Journal of International Business Studies, we have only 34 papers that contain the necessary data. But then when we go to, for example, Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology, I bet most of the papers will use student samples. Let's take a quick look here. And indeed, they had 281 papers that contained student data and 225 papers that had no student data. So a much larger number of papers that we can work with. Interestingly, we also have, but they probably will not work, so we can have the links here. I'll see if I can make it so that you don't have to look for paper each time, but just click on the link and go directly to the paper. But it seems like these links don't work if they were created on one computer and you're trying to use them on another. So it may still be necessary to literally just look by the paper ID. You just copy the paper ID, go back to the folder here, type it here, and get the journal, the paper. Yeah, but then you just literally record those results in the Excel file. And I will ask you to do it for about 10 papers. And so this way, first, you will experience for yourself if this is the type of task you want to work on. But then also, you will show me that you can do it. You can do it quickly, efficiently, and accurately. Each paper will be coded by several people, and I will check for accuracy. So just like apparently some students before made mistakes and told me that a paper contains data when it actually doesn't. So same thing here. I will take a look and see if you recorded all the variables correctly. But as long as you do this job well, as I said, we'll work this summer, and then hopefully it will lead to more collaboration in the future. All right, thank you so much. So there will be more instructions in the email that I will send to you as to what files to look for, link to the Dropbox, and so on and so forth. Good luck with the assignment. Hopefully you'll do well, and hopefully we'll work together. And so let's see how it goes. Actually, I should have, yeah. And let me stop the meeting here.